Laura Price arrived on Mars 14 hours after Sam Harper's call. She stepped off the transport shuttle into the dry, recycled air of Bradbury Station and was met by two military escorts who said nothing and led her to an underground railcar. The railcar took her deep beneath the Martian surface, through tunnels that were not on any public map, to a facility that most of humanity did not know existed. Laura had built this place. 3 years ago, Earth Unified Command had asked her to design a theoretical contingency, a plan for what humanity would do if everything went wrong at once, if the Council turned hostile, if an unknown enemy appeared, if some disaster meant that staying in normal space would mean extinction. Laura was the best spatial engineer alive, a woman in her mid-40s with steady hands and a mind that could hold the shape of 11-dimensional geometry the way other people held a picture of their living room. She had taken the assignment seriously and built something extraordinary. The Vanishing Protocol was a network of hidden relay stations spread across every human world and outpost. Each station could generate a fold in local space, a bubble that would pull everything within its radius into a pocket dimension, a separate layer of reality that existed alongside normal space but was invisible to conventional sensors. The pocket dimensions were stable, habitable, and completely undetectable. Laura had designed them to hold cities, oceans, atmospheres, and entire planetary ecosystems. She had designed them as lifeboats for a civilization. She had also hoped that no one would ever need to use them. Sam Harper arrived 2 hours after Laura. He brought Katie Marsh, who brought Diane Webb's energy grid data on a secure drive. They sat in a small conference room deep inside the facility and laid everything out on the table. The intercepted communications, the weapon grid powering up 40 light-years away, the warning from Envoy Drayle, the empty faces of the council delegates who had refused to look at Greg Turner. The picture was clear and terrible. The council had decided that humanity was a threat, and they intended to remove that threat permanently. The weapon grid could crack planets. The strike fleets could handle everything else. The timetable, based on Katie's analysis, gave them somewhere between 3 and 5 days before the attack began. Sam asked Laura one question. Could the Vanishing Protocol handle the full load? Every human being, every city, every ship, every piece of infrastructure, in that time frame? Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. The relay stations were already in place. They had been tested individually. The only thing that had never been tested was a full, simultaneous activation, but the math was solid. She had checked it 1,000 times. Sam convened a closed session with Earth's combined military and civilian leadership. It was held via encrypted subspace link, with no recording and no written minutes. Katie presented the intelligence. Diane presented the weapon data through a secure feed from Titan. Sam presented the choice. They could fight. Humanity had a respectable fleet, fast ships, good weapons, brave crews. But the Council commanded thousands of warships from dozens of species. And the planet-cracking grid made conventional defense meaningless. A fight would be brave and short, and would end with the death of every human being. Or they could vanish. The vote was unanimous. The Vanishing Protocol would be activated. The decision would be kept from the public. He understood the reason. 7 billion people could not be told that their civilization was about to be erased from the galaxy without mass panic making the evacuation impossible. But it meant lying to every person on every world, and Sam was a man who did not lie easily. The cover story was released within hours. A series of massive civil defense drills, the largest in human history, requiring all citizens to report to designated underground shelters. The drills were presented as routine, a response to increased subspace storm activity. News networks covered it with mild interest. People grumbled about the inconvenience, packed bags, and followed the instructions. Beneath the surface, the relay stations began powering up. Laura Price stood in the Mars Command Center, surrounded by banks of monitors and a team of engineers she had trained herself. Each station reported its status in sequence. Green lights began to appear on the master display, one for each relay node: Earth, Luna, Mars, the Jovian moons, Titan, the asteroid belt habitats, and every colony world stretching out to the edge of human space. 12,000 light-years from Earth, Danny Cole received sealed orders aboard the carrier Nomad's Reach. Danny was a captain in his late 30s, lean and dark-haired, with the kind of quiet confidence that made people trust him without quite knowing why. He had been running a border patrol with a battle group of 6 ships, and the sealed orders changed everything. He was to reposition his battle group along the frontier in a pattern that would look like a standard defensive reinforcement. He was to make noise, active sensor sweeps, visible fleet maneuvers, open comm traffic. He was to make it look like humanity was alert but not alarmed, preparing for a possible border dispute. In truth, his ships would be the last human vessels visible to the Council. They were bait. Danny read the orders twice, understood what they meant, and called his officers together. He told them what he could, which was not much. He told them to trust him. They did. On Verath Prime, Greg Turner and Megan Cross continued their diplomatic routine as if nothing had changed. Greg attended a reception hosted by the Tessari delegation and made small talk about agricultural yields. Megan smiled and laughed and complimented the Drenai ambassador on his new ceremonial robe. Neither of them mentioned the packed emergency bags hidden under their beds at the embassy, or the micro-transmitter Megan had slipped into a ventilation shaft to monitor Council security movements. Megan's transmitter picked up a conversation between 2 Council security officers outside the embassy that night. One of them said the human containment order would be active within 48 hours. The other asked what containment meant in this context. The first officer did not answer. Megan relayed the intercept to Katie Marsh. Katie updated the timetable. They had less time than they thought. On Earth, Pete Lawson was doing the hardest work of his life. Pete was a Marine sergeant, a big man with a square jaw and kind eyes, who had grown up on a farm in Virginia and joined the service because he wanted to protect people. Now he was helping evacuate a coastal city of 200,000 people into underground transit tunnels that connected to the relay network. He stood at the entrance to the tunnels and directed the flow of civilians with a calm voice and a steady hand. He watched families walk past him, carrying whatever they could hold. Children clutched stuffed animals and backpacks. An elderly man carried a small dog in a blanket. A woman held a framed photograph against her chest. None of them knew where they were really going. They thought it was a drill. They thought they would be home by the weekend. Pete kept his voice steady and his smile easy. He told a little girl that she was very brave. He helped a man in a wheelchair navigate the ramp. He answered questions he did not have answers to, with the kind of gentle confidence that kept people moving instead of panicking. When the last transport was loaded and the tunnel entrance sealed, Pete stood alone in the empty street. The city was silent. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the water gold and red. And Pete watched it because some part of him understood that this might be the last sunset anyone saw from this place for a very long time. His hands shook. He let them. There was no one left to see. Across every human world, the same scene played out in 1,000 different ways. Cities emptied into shelters that connected to relay stations. Ships docked at hidden ports. Satellites received quiet commands to prepare for spatial displacement. The largest and most desperate operation in human history unfolded in near-perfect silence, disguised as a drill that no one questioned, because humans had always been the kind of species that followed instructions when they were told it mattered. Laura Price watched the master display in the Mars Command Center. The green lights continued to spread. They were almost ready. Sam Harper sat in his office at the Jovian shipyards and stared at a photograph on his desk. It showed a lake in Montana, where he used to fish with his father. He wondered if the lake would still be there when they came back. He wondered if they would come back at all. He picked up his comm and gave the order to begin final preparations. The countdown had started, and there was no stopping it now. High Arbiter Zorath stood on the command bridge of the flagship Throne of Silence and looked out at the stars through a wide viewport that stretched from floor to ceiling. The ship was enormous, a cathedral of dark metal and humming energy fields, built to project the authority of the Galactic Council across every corner of known space. Zorath had commanded from this bridge for 23 years, and in that time he had ordered the subjugation of 4 species and the quiet elimination of 2 others. He did not enjoy these things. He simply believed they were necessary. The galaxy was old, and it had rules, and the rules said that no species should be allowed to grow too fast, reach too far, or become too difficult to control. Humans had broken all 3 rules. Warlord Sekka entered the bridge and saluted. Sekka was Korath, a species of heavy armored beings with 4 arms and deep-set orange eyes. He was the finest military commander the Council had produced in a century, patient and precise and utterly without sentiment. He laid a holographic star chart on the central table and began his briefing. The attack plan was called Directive Ember. 3 full battle fleets, over 800 warships, would strike simultaneously at Earth, Mars, and the 5 largest human colony worlds. The planet-cracking energy grid, which the Council had spent 9 years building in secret, would fire on Earth and Mars first, shattering both worlds into debris fields. The battle fleets would handle the remaining colonies and any human ships that attempted to flee. The entire operation was designed to last less than 6 hours. By the end of it, humanity would exist only in the past tense. Zorath studied the plan and approved it. He set the launch window for 12 hours. Sekka saluted again and left to prepare his fleets. That was all the time humanity had left, and they did not have a minute to waste. On Verith Prime, the clock ran out for Greg Turner and Megan Cross before anyone expected it to. Council security forces arrived at the human embassy at what would have been 3 in the morning by Earth time. They came in armored transports with weapons drawn, moving through the station corridors in tight formation. They surrounded the embassy, cut its external communications, and breached the front doors with a shake charge that blew them inward in a shower of sparks and bent metal. They found nothing. The embassy was empty. Every room had been cleared. Every piece of human technology, terminals, communication equipment, personal items, even the furniture, was gone. The walls were bare. The floors were clean. The only thing left in the entire building was a single datapad sitting in the center of the ambassador's desk. A security officer picked it up and read the screen. It displayed a short message in the common galactic trade language. We hoped it would not come to this. The officer stared at the words for a long time, then contacted Zorath. The High Arbiter received the report with a silence that his aides found more unsettling than any anger. Greg and Megan were already gone. Katie Marsh had sent them the extraction signal 4 hours earlier, and they had slipped out of the embassy through a maintenance tunnel that Megan had mapped during her first week on the station. A small, fast shuttle had been waiting for them in a commercial docking bay, under a false registration. By the time the security forces breached the embassy doors, Greg and Megan were in subspace, heading for the nearest relay station at maximum speed. Across the galaxy, the vanishing protocol reached full activation. Laura Price stood in the Mars Command Center, her hands resting on the edge of the main console, her eyes fixed on the master display. Every relay station was green. Every population center had reported ready. Every ship was in position. 7 billion human beings, spread across dozens of worlds and hundreds of orbital habitats, were about to step out of the universe. Laura took a breath, held it, and gave the command. Earth went first. From orbit it would have looked like a dream. The blue and white sphere of humanity's homeworld seemed to shimmer, as if the light around it had become uncertain. The shimmer lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the planet folded. There was no other word for it. Folding inward along dimensions that human eyes could not see, pulling its oceans and continents and atmosphere and every living thing on its surface into a pocket of space that existed beside reality, but not within it. The moon followed, dragged along by the gravitational anchor Laura had designed into the system. Orbital stations, satellites, and shipyards folded with them. In the time it took to draw a single breath, the space where Earth had been was empty. Not destroyed, not scattered. Simply empty, as if the planet had never existed at all. Mars went next. Then the Jovian stations, pulled inward in a cascade of folding light. Titan and its observatories, the asteroid belt habitats, the colony on Kepler 442b, the research station above Proxima Centauri. One by one, in a sequence that Laura had choreographed down to the millisecond, every piece of human civilization vanished from real space. Danny Cole watched from the bridge of Nomad's Reach as the process reached his battle group. He had positioned his ships exactly where his orders specified, making noise and looking visible, playing the part of a routine border patrol. Now the relay station nearest to his position activated, and the stars outside his viewport began to stretch and blur. His crew stood at their stations in perfect silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The familiar blackness of space was replaced by a pale, silver void, soft and endless and utterly still. They were inside the pocket dimension. Danny let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Katie Marsh's voice came through the comm channel from the primary command node, which Laura had established inside the largest pocket dimension anchored to Earth's former position. Katie's voice was calm and professional, the way it always was, but Danny could hear something underneath it, relief so deep it was almost grief. All stations reporting, Katie said. Full population accounted for. 7,042,000,000 and change. Every ship, every habitat, every relay node. We are complete. Danny closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and began issuing orders to his crew. The pocket dimension was safe, but it was not home, and there was no telling how long they would need to stay. 8 hours later, Warlord Sekka's strike fleets dropped out of subspace at Earth's coordinates. They found nothing. Sekka stood on his command bridge and stared at the viewport. Where Earth should have been, a blue world orbiting a yellow star, surrounded by the bustle of orbital infrastructure and defended by a fleet of warships. There was nothing. Empty space. Stars in the background. Not a single piece of debris, not a single energy signature, not a single molecule of atmosphere. His sensor officers ran full diagnostic sweeps. Their instruments were functioning perfectly. There was simply nothing to detect. Earth was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Reports came in from every strike group. Mars, gone. Kepler 442b, gone. The Jovian stations, the asteroid habitats, the border outposts, all gone. There was not a single human artifact, signal, or biological trace anywhere in known space. 800 warships hung in empty space, with their weapons armed, and absolutely nothing to shoot at. Sekka contacted Zorath, aboard the Throne of Silence. He delivered his report in the flat, precise tone he used for all military communications. But even his voice carried a note of something that might have been confusion, or might have been fear. The targets are not present, Sekka said. All human worlds and installations have disappeared. There is no debris consistent with destruction. There is no residual energy consistent with any known weapon or natural phenomenon. The humans are simply not here. Zorath sat on his command throne and said nothing. His aides waited for instructions. None came. For the first time in his 23 years as High Arbiter, Zorath had encountered something he had not planned for and could not explain. An entire species, 7 billion beings, their worlds, their ships, their history, had vanished from the galaxy as if they had never been there at all. And they had done it quietly, without a single shot fired, without a single warning given to the Council, without so much as a goodbye, unless you count in 6 words on a datapad in an empty embassy. Zorath finally spoke. He ordered Sekka to conduct a full search of every system within 100 light-years of Earth's former position. Sekka acknowledged the order, but both of them knew it was pointless. Whatever the humans had done, wherever they had gone, the Council's sensors could not find them. The greatest military operation in galactic history had arrived to find an empty room, and the silence it found there was louder than any weapon ever built. The official story was simple. High Arbiter Zorath addressed the full Galactic Council 12 days after the vanishing, and announced that humanity had voluntarily withdrawn from galactic affairs due to internal instability. He said it with the kind of smooth authority that had carried him through 2 decades of leadership, and for a few days, most delegations accepted it. Humanity had always been strange. Perhaps they had simply left. But the cracks appeared fast. The first crisis came from the Tessari homeworld. The Tessari had been suffering from a respiratory plague for over a decade, a slow, grinding illness that attacked their lung equivalents and killed their young and elderly in waves. Human pharmacists had developed an enzyme therapy 6 years ago that controlled the disease almost completely. It was cheap to produce, easy to administer, and had saved an estimated 4 million Tessari lives. The supply chain ran through a small human pharmaceutical station on the edge of Tessari space. That station was gone now, folded into nothing along with everything else, and the Tessari had no idea how to make the enzyme themselves. Within 3 weeks of the vanishing, the plague surged back. Hospitals on the Tessari homeworld filled to capacity. Children who had been healthy a month ago began to cough and struggle for air. The Tessari ambassador, Aelith, stood before the council and demanded that Zorath locate the humans and bring them back. Her voice shook with a fury that her species rarely showed. Zorath deflected. He said the council was conducting a thorough search. He said the situation was temporary. Aelith looked at him with her wide black eyes and said nothing more. She did not need to. Everyone in the chamber could see that she did not believe a single word. The Tessari were not alone. Humans had woven themselves into the fabric of galactic civilization more deeply than anyone had realized. They were traders, haulers, engineers, doctors, mediators, and problem solvers. They ran cargo through shipping lanes that other species considered too dangerous. They repaired old stations that no one else wanted to touch. They developed agricultural strains adapted to alien soils, and designed water filtration systems for worlds with toxic oceans. They had done these things not because the Council asked them to, but because humans were the kind of species that saw a problem and could not walk past it without trying to fix it. Now all of that was gone, and the galaxy began to feel the absence. Trade networks that had relied on human logistics companies fell apart within weeks. A supply chain connecting the Drenai mineral worlds to the Korath industrial stations broke down because the human freight company that managed the middle leg of the route had vanished, along with its ships and crews. The Drenai could not find a replacement. No other species was willing to haul cargo through the unstable subspace corridor that the human captains had navigated as casually as a morning commute. Food shortages appeared on 3 colony worlds that had depended on human agricultural technology. A water crisis struck an orbital habitat that used a human-designed filtration system, and when the system broke down, No one could repair it, because the engineering specifications had been stored on human servers that no longer existed in real space. And quietly, in the shadows of every diplomatic meeting and trade negotiation, a question began to circulate that no one wanted to ask out loud. What really happened to the humans? And why did it happen right before Directive Ember was supposed to launch? Envoy Drail answered that question on a cold morning in the council chamber. Drail was Forathi, a reptilian species with dark green scales and golden eyes that seemed to see through walls. He was old by his species standards, nearly 140, and he moved with the slow care of someone who had learned that patience was more powerful than speed. He had served on the council for 60 years, longer than anyone except Zorath himself, and he had earned a reputation as a quiet moderate who rarely spoke in open session. When he rose from his seat that morning and asked for the floor, the chamber went still. Drail almost never asked for the floor. He spoke for 20 minutes. His voice was steady and unhurried, and every word landed like a stone dropped into water. He revealed the existence of Directive Ember. He described the weapon grid, the strike fleets, the planned annihilation of every human world. He named the species whose military forces had been assigned to the operation. He named the council members who had voted for it. He named Zorath. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted. Several species withdrew from the session entirely. The Tessari delegation walked out in silence, which was somehow worse than the shouting. 3 smaller delegations announced their immediate suspension of support for the ruling circle. Zorath sat on his throne and watched the chaos unfold with an expression that betrayed nothing. But his aides noticed that his hands had gone very still. Drail finished his speech and sat down. He had just destroyed the political order that had governed the galaxy for centuries, and he did it without raising his voice. Inside the pocket dimensions, humanity was learning how to live in a silver void. The pocket dimensions were not unpleasant. Laura Price had designed them to sustain life comfortably. Gravity, breathable air, stable temperatures, and light cycles that mimicked the sun. Earth's pocket dimension held the planet itself, its moon, and its entire orbital infrastructure, all suspended in a space that looked like an endless pearl-colored sky. It was beautiful in a strange, quiet way, but it was not home. There were no stars at night. The horizon did not curve. The sky never changed color. Laura and her engineering teams worked around the clock to refine the environment. They adjusted atmospheric pressure, stabilized magnetic fields, and created artificial weather patterns to prevent the psychological effects of living under an unchanging sky. It was delicate, exhausting work, and Laura slept in 3-hour shifts on a cot next to her console. Danny Cole organized a defense perimeter using sensor drones that could project through the fold boundary and observe real space without revealing the pocket dimension's location. He positioned his battle group in a protective formation around the primary command node and ran continuous drills to keep his crews sharp. The waiting was hard on everyone. Soldiers were trained to act, not to sit in a silver void and wonder what was happening outside. Katie Marsh built an intelligence network. She deployed swarms of microscopic probes through the fold boundary, scattering them across council space like invisible dust. Each probe was smaller than a grain of sand and could observe, record, and transmit data back through the fold. Within weeks, Katie had eyes and ears in every council chamber, on every major station, and aboard every significant warship. She saw the trade networks collapsing. She saw the Tessari dying. She saw Drail's speech and the political earthquake it caused. She reported everything to Sam Harper. Sam gathered the senior leadership and reviewed the intelligence. Then he did something he had been dreading since the moment the vanishing protocol was activated. He addressed the entire human population. The broadcast reached every pocket dimension simultaneously. Sam stood in a bare room in the Mars Command Facility, wearing his uniform, looking directly into a camera. He told them the truth. All of it. He told them about Directive Ember, about the weapon grid, about the Council's plan to destroy every human world. He told them about the warning from Drail, and the decision to activate the vanishing protocol. He told them that every person, every city, every ship, and every piece of their civilization had been successfully moved into pocket dimensions, where the Council could not find them. He told them he was sorry for the deception. He told them it had been necessary. He told them that humanity would return to real space, but only when it was safe, and only on their own terms. The broadcast ended with a moment of silence. 7 billion people sat in shelters and homes and barracks across a dozen pocket dimensions, and absorbed the fact that their entire galaxy had tried to kill them, and they had survived by stepping sideways out of existence. Pete Lawson watched the broadcast from a training facility inside Earth's pocket dimension. When it was over, the room was silent for a long time. Then a young recruit next to him asked what they were going to do. Pete looked at her and said they were going to train. And when they went back, they were going to make sure that nothing in the galaxy ever made humanity run again. The recruit nodded. Pete stood up and started the next drill. Somewhere in the silver void, 7 billion people began the long, quiet work of waiting. 6 months passed inside the pocket dimensions. 6 months of silver skies and artificial sunsets, of children asking when they could see real stars again, of engineers keeping systems running, and soldiers keeping themselves sharp, and ordinary people finding ways to fill the hours with work and laughter and the stubborn business of being alive. It was not easy. Some people were angry, some were afraid, some mourned for a sky they could not see and a world they could not feel beneath their feet the way it was supposed to feel. But they endured, because that was what humans had always done, and because Sam Harper had promised them they would go home. Outside the pocket dimensions, the galaxy had changed. Zorath was gone. The political earthquake that began with Drail's speech had grown into a full collapse of the ruling circle. 17 species had formally withdrawn their support. The Tessari had led a vote of no confidence that passed with a margin so wide it was almost embarrassing. Zorath had been removed from his position and placed under formal investigation for what the moderate coalition was calling unauthorized acts of aggression against a member species. He spent his days in a guarded apartment on Vareth Prime, staring out a window at a galaxy that no longer answered to him. Warlord Sekka's fleet had been recalled and partially disbanded. The warships that had been built to destroy humanity sat idle in orbital docks, their crews reassigned and their weapons powered down. Sekka himself had accepted the recall without protest. He was a soldier, not a politician, and soldiers followed orders. The new orders said stand down, so he stood down. A coalition of moderate species, led by Envoy Drail, now held a slim but functional majority on the council. He had simply told the truth, and the truth had rearranged the galaxy around him. He used his new influence carefully, pushing through a series of reforms that stripped the ruling circle of its ability to authorize military action without a full council vote. He also issued a formal public invitation for humanity to return. The invitation was broadcast on every open channel in the galaxy. It included a full admission of the Council's planned attack, a formal apology from the new leadership, and a pledge to dismantle the planet-cracking energy grid under independent supervision. It was, by the standards of galactic diplomacy, an extraordinary document, the kind of thing that had never been offered to any species in the history of the Council. Katie Marsh's intelligence network picked up the broadcast immediately. Her microscopic probes had been watching the political transformation in real time, and she had already confirmed most of what the invitation promised. The weapon grid was being powered down. She could see the energy readings dropping week by week. Sekka's fleet was in dock. The moderate coalition was real and appeared to be acting in good faith. But Katie was not a trusting person by nature. She ran additional verification through every source she had. Danny Cole's sensor drones confirmed that no hostile fleets were positioned anywhere near Earth's forward coordinates, or any of the other target systems. Laura Price's engineering teams ran diagnostic checks on the vanishing protocol's reversal systems, and reported that the unfolding process was stable. Every planet, every station, every structure could be returned to real space exactly where it had been, with no degradation and no loss. Sam Harper reviewed all of it. He sat with the reports for a full day, reading and rereading, asking questions, weighing risks. Then he called a meeting of the senior leadership. Katie, Laura, Danny, Greg Turner, Megan Cross, Diane Webb, and Pete Lawson. They gathered in the Mars Command Center, the same room where the decision to vanish had been made 6 months earlier. Sam asked each of them for their assessment. Katie said the intelligence was solid. Laura said the systems were ready. Danny said his fleet was prepared to provide cover if anything went wrong. Greg said the diplomatic window was as good as it was going to get. Megan said the body language analysis of Drail's public appearances showed no signs of deception. Diane said the weapon grid's energy output was at 12% and falling. Pete said his people were ready for whatever came next. Sam nodded. Then he gave the order. The unfolding began at the outer colonies. The smallest and most distant human outposts emerged from their pocket dimensions first. Research stations, mining platforms, tiny settlements on worlds that most humans had never heard of. They reappeared in real space, like bubbles rising to the surface of a pond, each one accompanied by a brief shimmer of distorted light as the fold boundary dissolved. Sensor stations across Council space lit up with alerts. Species that had mourned humanity's disappearance, that had struggled without their medicines and their trade routes, and their stubborn willingness to help, broadcast messages of relief and welcome. The Tassari sent a single transmission that read, in their formal diplomatic language, "The absence is ended. We are grateful." The colony worlds came next. Kepler 442b returned to its orbit around a distant red star, its cities intact, and its people blinking in the light of a real sun for the first time. The asteroid belt habitats popped back into existence in a cascade that looked, from a distance, like a string of lights turning on one by one. The Jovian stations reappeared around Jupiter, their massive structures settling back into their orbits as if they had never left. Mars unfolded on a Tuesday afternoon by the old Earth calendar. The red planet shimmered into view, with its domes and tunnels and underground cities, its thin atmosphere catching the distant sunlight. Laura Price stood in the command center and watched the status board shift from pocket dimension green to real space blue, and she allowed herself a small private smile. Earth returned last. It emerged from folded space with a shimmer that spread across the entire solar system, a wave of light that rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. The blue and white sphere appeared in its ancient orbit around the sun. Oceans gleaming, clouds drifting, continents spread out in patterns that every human child learned before they could read. The moon followed, settling into its orbit with a gravitational gentleness that Laura had spent months perfecting. Orbital platforms hummed back to life. Satellites resumed their paths. On the surface, people stepped outside and looked up at a sky full of real stars, and many of them cried because they had not realized how much they had missed something as simple as a night sky. Greg Turner and Megan Cross arrived at Vareth Prime aboard a diplomatic shuttle 3 days later. The council chamber was full. Every delegation had sent representatives. The galleries were packed. Envoy Drail met them at the entrance to the chamber, and for a long moment, the old reptilian diplomat simply looked at Greg with his golden eyes and said nothing. Then He inclined his head in a gesture of deep respect and stepped aside to let them pass. Greg walked to the central podium. He looked out at the assembled delegations, hundreds of species, thousands of individuals, many of whom had voted to destroy his kind or had stood by while others made that decision. He was aware of the weight of the moment. He was aware that every word he said would be remembered. He spoke calmly. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He did not boast or gloat or demand apologies beyond the one that had already been given. He said that humanity had chosen to disappear rather than fight. He said this was not because humans were afraid of fighting. Their history made it quite clear that they were not. But because they had wanted to give the galaxy a chance to see what it looked like without them. He said the empty space where Earth used to be should have been a mirror. He said he hopes the Council had looked into it and understood what they saw. He paused and let the silence hold for a moment. Then he presented a new treaty. The treaty included mutual defense obligations, requiring any attack on a member species to be treated as an attack on all. It established an independent weapons inspection body with the authority to investigate any military program on any world. And it included a clause, Greg emphasized this, that granted any species the right to withdraw peacefully from the Council at any time, for any reason, without facing military consequences. The moderate coalition accepted the treaty within the hour. Even several of the species that had supported Directive Ember voted in favor. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. That evening, Greg and Megan sat in the rebuilt human embassy on Verith Prime and shared a bottle of wine that Greg had been saving for an occasion he was not sure would ever come. Megan asked him if he thought it would last. The treaty, the peace, the new order. Greg said he did not know. He said humans had been building things that might not last since the first time they stacked one stone on top of another, and they had never let that stop them. Back on the Nomad's Reach, Danny Cole stood on the observation deck and watched Earth turning slowly below. The ship was in high orbit, running standard patrols, and the view was the kind of thing that could make a person forget, for a moment, everything that had happened. Katie Marsh walked in and stood beside him. They watched the planet turn and the sun catch the edges of the clouds. Katie said that the next time someone built a weapon pointed at their home, she would prefer to know about it more than a few days in advance. Danny agreed and said that was why he was not retiring anytime soon. On Mars, Laura Price powered down the Vanishing Protocol's command systems for the last time. She sealed the facility, locked every door, and set the security codes to a sequence that only she and Sam Harper knew. She walked through the empty corridors and let her hand trail along the walls she had built, the systems she had designed, the machine that had saved her species. At the main entrance, she paused. She thought about turning off the lights. Then she decided to leave them on, just in case. Pete Lawson sat on a bench outside a barracks on Earth as the sun went down. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep blue, and the first stars appeared. A new recruit sat down beside him and asked what it had been like. The vanishing, the silver void, the months of waiting, the return. Pete thought about it for a long time. He watched the stars come out, one by one, and felt the breeze on his face, and listened to the sounds of people walking and talking and living in a world that was real and solid and exactly where it was supposed to be. He said it was the quietest thing he had ever been a part of, and somehow it was the loudest statement humanity had ever made. The recruit looked up at the stars and nodded, and the two of them sat together in the growing dark, while the world turned beneath them, and the galaxy, for the first time in a very long while, was at peace. Greg Turner had stood before the Galactic Council more times than he could count, but something about today felt wrong. The grand amphitheater on Verith Prime was the same as always, a vast bowl of polished stone and floating light panels, filled with delegates from over 300 species. Their seats rose in layered rings around the central platform, where Greg stood in his dark suit, a datapad in one hand and a careful smile on his face. He had done this 100 times. Trade proposals, resource agreements, medical exchanges. Humanity had been a provisional member of the Council for 11 years, and Greg had spent 8 of those years as Earth's ambassador, learning every unspoken rule and quiet signal that the alien delegates used when they were happy, bored, or hiding something. Today, they were hiding something. He noticed it first with the Tessari delegation. The Tessari were tall, thin beings with silver-blue skin and wide black eyes. And they had always been friendly toward humans. Their lead delegate, a female named Aelith, usually greeted Greg with a slow nod and a soft clicking sound that meant warmth. Today she stared straight ahead and said nothing. Her hands were pressed flat against her lap, which Greg had learned was a sign of stress. He moved through his trade proposal, a simple exchange of agricultural seed stock for refined mineral compounds, and watched the room as he spoke. The Draenei delegates whispered among themselves. The Korath delegation had sent only 2 members instead of their usual 5. High Arbiter Zorath, who sat on a raised throne at the top of the chamber, kept glancing at a screen built into the arm of his seat. He was reading something. He was distracted. Greg finished his proposal and asked if there were questions. Zorath ended the session with a wave of his long gray hand and said only that the council would review the matter at a later time. The chamber began to empty. Greg stood on the platform for a moment, watching the delegates file out, and felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He walked back to the human embassy, a modest building on the outer ring of the station, and found Megan Cross waiting for him. Megan was his xenolinguist and diplomatic attaché, a woman in her early 30s with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. She had a gift for reading alien body language that sometimes seemed almost supernatural. Greg told her about the session. She listened without interrupting, then said she had noticed something too. Council security patrols near the embassy had doubled in the last 2 days. She had counted them from the window. Greg sat down and rubbed his face with both hands. 12,000 light-years away, on a cold Tuesday morning, at Birth Unified Command Headquarters in Colorado, Katie Marsh was staring at a screen full of noise. Katie was the Chief Intelligence Officer for humanity's military structure. A quiet woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and a habit of chewing the end of her pen when she was thinking. Her job was to monitor subspace communications across the network of listening posts that humanity had quietly placed along the edges of its colonial territory. Most of what she picked up was commercial traffic, shipping manifests, and the occasional diplomatic message. But over the past 72 hours, her systems had flagged a pattern. Fragments of coded transmissions were bouncing between Council military channels on frequencies that the Council did not officially use. The encryption was layered and dense, far beyond what they use for routine operations. Katie's team had managed to crack a few pieces, and the words they pulled out made her blood run cold. The fragments mentioned something called Directive Ember. They referenced target coordinates that matched the positions of Earth, Mars, and 3 of humanity's largest colony worlds. And they included a timetable. The timetable was short. Katie organized her findings into a report and sent it directly to Admiral Sam Harper at the Jovian shipyards. Sam was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with gray hair and a calm voice that never seemed to change whether he was ordering lunch or scrambling a fleet. He read Katie's report twice, set it down, and stared out the window of his office at the massive shape of a half-built cruiser floating in the construction dock outside. He picked up a secure comm line and called Katie back. He asked her how confident she was. She said she was confident enough to lose sleep over it. Sam thanked her and ended the call. On Titan, Saturn's largest moon, Diane Webb was working a late shift at the Deep Space Observatory. Diane was an astrophysicist, a small woman with curly red hair and glasses she constantly pushed up her nose. Her job was to map energy signatures in deep space, cataloging star formations, nebulae, and the occasional subspace anomaly. It was quiet, detailed work, and she loved it. But tonight, her instruments had picked up something that did not belong in any catalog. A massive energy grid was powering up in a region of space roughly 40 light-years from Earth. The grid covered an area larger than most solar systems, and was drawing power from sources that did not appear on any published Council star chart. Diane ran the readings through every database she had access to, and found only one match, a theoretical paper from 9 years ago that described the design of a planet-cracking weapon array. The paper had been written by a Council physicist, who later retracted it under pressure. The Council had publicly denied that such a weapon existed. Diane sat very still in her chair for a long time. Then she sent her findings to Katie Marsh with a priority flag that meant, "Read this right now." Back on Verith Prime, Greg Turner was preparing to close the embassy for the night when his personal terminal chimed. An encrypted message had arrived on a channel that only one person in the galaxy used to reach him. Envoy Drail, a reptilian diplomat from a species called the Varathi. Drail had always been different from the other council members. He asked questions about human culture, listened to the answers, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the company of the strange, loud, stubborn species that had stumbled into galactic politics. Greg opened the message. It contained 6 words. "Leave your worlds. You have days." Greg read the message 3 times. His hands were steady, but his heart was not. He forwarded it to Katie Marsh. Katie read it, cross-referenced it with the intercepted transmissions and Diane Webb's energy grid data, and forwarded everything to Sam Harper. Sam sat alone in his office and looked at the combined intelligence for a long time. The listening posts, the weapon grid, the warning from an alien who had no reason to lie, it all pointed to the same conclusion. The Galactic Council was preparing to destroy humanity, and they intended to do it soon. Sam opened a file on his terminal. It was buried under 3 layers of security clearance and had not been accessed in over a year. The file was labeled Vanishing Protocol. He read the first page, then picked up his comm and called Laura Price.